Once there was a mighty prince waiting to be crowned king. He was a selfish prince. His ego was roaring and he cared only for himself. He was the greatest warrior the land had ever seen, and he spent most of his life fighting men and monsters, trying to prove that he was unbeatable. His father, the king, ruled the land. The queen had died giving birth to the prince, and the king ruled the city as a humble man. However, he was growing old and weak, and he understood that he would soon need to hand over the crown to the prince. Knowing his son's selfishness, the king refused giving away the crown and kept ruling. The prince felt neglected by his father and was filled with anger. Instead of focusing on the crown, the prince decides to go on a quest for immortality. As a child, the prince had been hearing stories about a secret pendant that brought immortality to the person wearing it around their neck. Being consumed by the thought of immortality made the prince obsessed, and one day he decides to go on a quest to find it. He picks his 6 best soldiers and leaves the castle in search of the pendant that would bring him endless glory. The men walked for 3 straight weeks before reaching their first stop. In the mountains, there was a hole to hell. The prince had to jump into the hole alone and face whatever was there to greet him. In hell, he got to a boat and rowed down a dark river. Suddenly faces appeared in the shadows. The faces represented every man that the prince had ever killed. Even though confused and bothered by what he was seeing, the prince continues rowing. He reaches the end and sees the ghost of his long-dead mother. He gets off the boat and stands in front of her, looking straight into her eyes. She tells him that the only way to find the hidden pendant is to kill her soul with his sword and never see her again. The prince hesitates at first, but quickly decides what needs to be done and plunges his sword through his mother, and her spirit fades away. The mother disappears, and his sword suddenly starts glowing in a single direction. The prince rows back and climbs up from the hole back to the surface. When he reaches ground, he sees death and destruction around him. He sees the shadow of a great beast and all of his soldiers lying dead on the ground. The prince is devastated by what's in front of him and collapses to the ground. He mourns his friends for 6 days and 6 nights, one soldier at a time, before continuing his quest. He follows the direction of his sword, and after 2 months, he finally catches up with the monster, wearing the pendant around its neck. A great battle bursts out between the two. The prince and the monster fight for 12 hours straight before he finally kills it by piercing his sword through its heart. Standing on the beast, the prince is victorious, and the pendant is finally in his possession. Consumed with joy, he heads back towards the castle holding the pendant in his hand, waiting to reveal it when back home. After walking for 2 months, the prince is exhausted. He continues without rest and suddenly trips on a rock, losing grip of the pendant. The pendant breaks into pieces, and the prince realizes that all he had sacrificed was for nothing. He suddenly understands what kind of man he was and how selfish he had been. He had been killing men for glory, lost all of his friends for his own selfishness, and was even willing to kill his own mother for power. Devastated by his actions, the prince walks back to the castle empty-handed. A year goes by and the prince is a changed man. He's become more humble, understanding that all his mistakes came from his own ego. The king sees a great difference in his son and decides that it's time for him to take over. The prince is crowned king and leads his people with great mercy and righteousness. He is now a changed man. After realizing what type of person he used to be, he transformed into a king that cared for his people and was willing to do anything for their happiness. He ruled for the rest of his life in great success and would forever be remembered as the greatest king that ever lived.